Welcome back, grade 12s, from that short break. Just before the ad break, we were looking at some economic indicators, and we ended off there just with the moving averages and the importance of having valid data in order to make sound economic decisions. Okay, so now we learned quite a bit in this lesson, I must say. There were quite a few new concepts that we have introduced. So I want to just spend a bit of time just going over the terminology that we used in this lesson, just to make sure that you understand, but not just understand, but you are also able to apply what we have learned in this lesson into, practical stuff that we do in our daily lives, and also so that when we are watching a program and they're talking about these indicators, that you have a good understanding of why we have them and how they can be used in order to make sound economic decisions. So let's go back and look at the new economic paradigm that we referred to in our first point. So this tries to eliminate economic uncertainty by smoothing the business cycle. So government tries to achieve this goal of economic stability and predictability through the counter-cyclic fiscal and monetary policies. Okay, I'm sure you're sitting there like, now we're going big with this business jargon. So let's just unpack it for you. So we know what business cycles are because we know that the world of economics is not always stable or constant. You can't say it's going to stay like this, it's like this. You can't box it actually because of the fluctuations that actually happen. So we know that there are good times when there's economic prosperity, and we know that we've got difficult times, for example, when we're going through a recession where there will be less spending from the households because they are not able to, for example, sell their factor inputs into the firms in order to generate income. So it is a difficult economic period. So we know that government tries to smoothen the cycles by using the monetary policies and also the fiscal policies that we looked at in our previous lesson, because they want to make sure that our economy becomes stable, and that also we are able to predict if we're going to have an upswing or a downswing, so that we can plan accordingly and communicate the information to the households, businesses, and also for government to know so that they can put measures in place. A paradigm is grounded in demand side and supply side economic policy. So we did look at the demand side and also the supply side, or in terms of economic policy. So let's go back and remind ourselves what we said around the demand side policies. So this refers to measures undertaken by the government to influence aggregate demand for goods and services in the country. The government uses fiscal and monetary policies in order to achieve this goal. Okay, so we know that when the government tries to influence the aggregate demand by using fiscal and monetary policies in order to achieve that goal. So that will be known as the demand side policies, because we're wanting to influence aggregate demand by using fiscal and monetary policies as well. Okay, so move down, there we are. So the government might try to stimulate aggregate by encouraging consumer spending. Okay, so for example, if the government cuts down on the tax that we pay as consumers, that means that we have more money in our pockets, and therefore we can spend more because we've got that little extra income that we didn't have previously. So they can do that to encourage spending in the market. So this is just an example of how government can actually achieve this demand side policy because we said they can use fiscal and monetary policies in order to achieve this. We also spoke about the supply side policies, which refer to a measure taken or undertaken by the government to influence the aggregate supply. Remember, with the demand side policies, the government tries to influence the aggregate demand, but here they are trying to influence the aggregate supply for goods and services in the country in order to meet the changes in demand, okay? Because there has been a change in demand and therefore something needs to happen to the supply so that the supply meets the changes that have been caused or that have happened around demand. So government might, for example, try to stimulate aggregate supply by reducing the production costs and improving efficiency, okay? So we spoke about that earlier on in our lesson where we said, there are certain things that the government, by having cash incentives and things like that, they can actually improve or stimulate the aggregate supply by reducing those costs and also improving the efficiencies. Okay, so important concepts here, reducing production costs and improving the efficiency as well. And then economic forecasting, the process of making predictions about changing conditions and future events that may affect the economy. Okay, so it's a very important aspect of the world of economics because we have to try and predict what's going to happen next. What are the trends? How is this decision going to influence supply and demand and the government itself? So fiscal and monetary policies, there's always a reaction from the participants in regards to decisions made around those two policies. We also looked at economic indicators, which are a statistic used to measure some aspect of the economy. All right, so when we forecast, we initiate a process of making predictions, and then when we use economic indicators, we use a statistic in order to measure some aspect of the economy. Okay, so that's some important terminology that we need to be familiar with. Okay. And then we also discussed the leading economic indicators. These are economic indicators which change before the economy changes. And then we said the lagging economic indicators are the ones that do not change direction until the business cycle actually change its direction. Okay, so there's always a comparison between these two, and hence I said to you earlier on, look at the terminology. If you are leading, you will then be in the forefront, obviously. But if you're lagging behind, you are trailing behind. So these are not going to change unless the business cycles change first, okay? And then we're going to bring in another set here of economic indicators. These are economic indicators that simply move at the same time together with the aggregate economic activity. So these are our coincident economic indicators. They move at the same time together with the aggregate economic activity. So economic activity is very important in all of this because when we look at the number of employment advertisements that have been put out, that could help us to determine the fact that there will be more people employed in the next month or two because of the information that has been put out there, that there are lots of firms that are looking to employ new people in order to increase production, which will also therefore increase economic activity and will result in economic growth, because we know that economic growth is something that's very important in the world of economics. Okay. So just know the difference between the leading and the lagging economic indicators, and just know that these ones do not change direction until the business cycle has changed direction. Okay, and then we remember when we looked at the business cycle, we looked at our peak over there, and then we said right at the bottom will be our trough, which will be the lowest point in the downswing, and then our peak obviously will be the highest point in the upswing. Okay, so also it would look at the fact whether our economy is actually growing or it's shrinking. Okay, so when our economy shrinks, it means that we have less economic activity happening, and therefore we're not growing our GDP, which is the total number of goods and services that are produced within a particular country, because then our GDP helps us to understand or to see if our economy is growing, because if we've had more economic activity happening in that particular year, that will show that actually our economy is growing and is making good progress and people are employed. And that relationship that I keep on referring to between production, spending, and income is so important, because whenever we look at these new concepts that we've introduced, it's all about, production. Does it increase or decrease? And, who is spending what? Consumers or households are getting an income, and therefore they are spending that. And then we get that multiplier effect that, my spending becomes the next person's income. So don't study the sections in isolation, but it's important that you look at the interrelationship or the interrelatedness of these different topics. How are they related? How do they interact with one another? Because economics is all about integration and, not just looking at issues in isolation, but what are the different factors that actually play a role in terms of our economy growing or actually shrinking, if that's the case. Okay, well, that's a wrap of today's lesson. So we've looked at some important concepts and just a few pointers before we wrap up the lesson in terms of how you need to approach this particular section, because, we've spoken about economic indicators. So I would really like you to get the business part of a newspaper. You can get the business report. I'm not going to name specific newspapers because I don't want to give them that free advertising or advertisement or promotion, but the newspapers that have a business section on them. So look at the economic indicators that are being used by different companies that specialize in forecasting business activity, so that you've got a practical sense of what these companies do and the data that they look at before they can actually make these predictions. So it's important that we do that. So keep up with the current affairs. If there are any important decisions that are made around monetary and fiscal policies, you have to know that, because those decisions will either have a positive or negative impact on the economy. So it's important that, yes, we learn about the concepts, but also it's important that we have a practical understanding of how these actually work in the world of economics. So it's important that we not just looking at the terminology, but we are able to apply it. And also, when you read the business report of a newspaper, you can see a graph that's been put there, and then you can try and analyze that and see what information was used in order to make that particular decision. So it's important that I encourage you to do that. So yeah, so that's the lesson about the new economic paradigm which takes a very interesting direction, because it brings a different perspective of how government should approach the smoothing or the fine-tuning of business cycles, because the government can actually use its fiscal and monetary policies in order to fine-tune the economy, so that they can control issues like unemployment, production costs, and also sometimes they may just want to encourage us to spend a bit more, and then they can reduce or cut the tax rates, so that we've got a little bit of money left in our pockets, so that we can participate in economic activity. So it's all about that relationship between production, spending, and income, and us as ordinary consumers or households wanting to satisfy our needs with the fact that we've got limited, scarce resources and unlimited wants and needs. So economic decisions have to be made in a best possible way in order to make sure that those needs are well attended to, and that the resources are allocated well, so that we all benefit in the economic activities. Well, that's a wrap from today's lesson. I trust that you enjoyed and you learned so much from this lesson. From me, Uspiwe. See you next time. Cheers.